In Stuyvesant Park, around 16th and 3rd Avenue, between 16th and 2nd Avenue, there are roses blooming in front of the Christmas tree. Beautiful roses. And the Christmas tree is lit, and you can sit there at night and look at the beautiful Christmas tree lit and the beautiful roses blooming. It was enough to cause me to begin to hum, "Lo, how a rose ere blooming." But the lyrics soon morphed into "We shall overcome." The leaves are not off the tree in our backyard. They've been there, hanging, waiting for something. They may think it's the third Sunday in Advent. How can these things be? Not to mention SantaCon. How can that thing be? And I suppose I should ask the real question, which is, how can anything be? But I'll leave that up to God. Come back to earth and say that things aren't going to turn out the way our fear thinks they are. They're just not going to turn out that bad. Things are about to become very good in this season of Advent, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And your refusal to participate in fear will make that true. And if you participate in fear, maybe things will turn out really awful. So fear is everywhere right now. It kind of should be, given all the rotten things that are happening. But it looks like it's been there for a long time, which is why Zechariah and Mary's question, how can these things be, starts in fear, an ancient fear, and ends in praise and wonder. Each of them start, "What? Are you kidding me?" and ends with, "Oh my God, you weren't joking, were you?" We can start and stay in fear as long as we want to, and we can also leave it behind. And when we leave it behind, praise and wonder erupt. So how can almost anything be? Do you all remember how much cell phones used to cost if you went abroad? I mean, you got scared to death if somebody rang it once it was activated and started counting $3.52 a minute, much less a text message. Now you can go to France, as Warren and I have just done, to be a part of COP21. You can go there, and for $10 a day, your dentist can call you from New York City. While you're walking down the street in Paris, the phone rings perfectly, and you say, "Oh, hi. Yes, I know about the appointment." $10 a day, your phone is like all the text you want, all the email you want, and all the phoning you want. How can that thing be? Do you all remember being at first threatened by the World Wide Web? I know some of you were never alive without it, but some of us were alive without it, and we were scared of it at first. And now we refuse to go anywhere without it for an additional $10 a day. The real question is, how can anything be? And who prepares us for which story about the way things are supposed to be? See, that question, how can these things be, assumes that you already know what you think things ought to be, right? This is how they should be, and they're not. Well, I don't know who said what to you, but raised as a cradle Christian, I was taught that things are going to be saved and whole, and that I'll be a part of that great salvation. See, we are in the story preparation business here. We love to tell a good story, and we have a really good story to tell. And Zechariah knew it, and Mary knew it, and we know it. So I went to Paris to cover COP21 because of Naomi Klein. She said that she had been outsourcing responsibility for climate change to her leaders, and that she no longer trusted her leaders, and that there was no way in hell they were going to do anything about climate change because their interests do not line up with climate change. Their interests actually line up against climate change, and that she had an essential personal experience that said she couldn't outsource responsibility for it anymore. And when I heard her say that, I realized she was talking not just to herself, but also to me and to mine. Everything, as she put it so well, must change, and I appear to be a piece of everything. The word outsourcing was a word that went straight to my heart, because I love nature as much as anybody else, and I want a beautiful climate for people. It's where my heart really lives. And I was still thinking that somebody was going to take care of that for me. And I realized that they're not. Apparently, a New Yorker cartoonist was listening in on my brain. Here's the cartoon. A man in a bar is introducing himself to a woman, and he says to her, "I'm starting a startup that will help other startups." And I felt pretty condemned by that. See, I teach a lot. I'm always thinking about Judson as a startup, another way to do and be a congregation, a site for experimentation, imagination, risk-taking, edge living, sometimes even showing off what it might mean to be a church in the 21st century. I think of us as a startup. And I know I'm accused of being a starter-upper. To call this a vocational crisis would be going too far, because the crisis isn't in me, it's in the world that I have allowed to be. The crisis is in the streets of Baltimore and New York and Chicago and in the low-lying islands of the global south, the sacrifice zones, as Naomi Klein puts it so well. The way my privilege works is that I'm always starting to start up and not taking responsibility for what has had a long startup period, had a lot of chance to get going. See, I could probably still get a date in a bar with my elevator speech, but I'd rather not. I'd rather change something and stop starting to change something. Plus, as many of you also know, I am more than slightly in love with the Pope. The Pope is praising the earth and loving the poor, and that's the kind of person I like to be with. So I knew I had a few outlets in which to publish. I knew I wanted to be a megaphone for the Pope and get his powerful word out powerfully, thus Paris. It was a place I could do the max I could in the most strategic way I could. It was the way to get over outsourcing. So I became girl reporter and learned so much from people who have been at this all the time, every day. They are amazing. I couldn't stop running around the city getting to the next event. It was so very, very exciting. For the Post, you can go on religiondispatches.org. I have 2 more to go and 8 are up. So I'm going to tell you what it's like in 5 connected sentences. It takes 5. I tried to get it down to 3. So, 1, Paris still glistens, especially with Christmas lights as extravagant as anything we do here. Paris is still Paris in its energy, even with the stuffed animals, all dirty and worn, the old shoes from the people who were killed at La République, the dirty candle still burning. The site of the terrorist attack is pathetic. It's worn, it's dirty. Handwritten signs are up from the people of Kashmir. We denounce misspelled terrorism. It's a very sad place. So it's glistening and it's Christmassy and it's sad and it's extraordinarily open to the visitors, free subway rides the first couple of days, guides everywhere in little outfits and hats, helping you to find yourself. If you even begin to look lost, one of them runs over and says, "Again, may I help you? May I help you?" French President Hollande gave extraordinary leadership to the conference. Some even speculate that there was a sympathy vote to the French going on because of the attack. People from all over the world were everywhere, so that you thought you were in a special part of the globe, the global part of the globe, and you were. Kairos was a word translated in a gazillion languages, and we were there, glistening, fully lit, globally, and energetically discussing apocalypse. Glittering, global, engaged, fully lit, discussing the end of the world as we know it. After terrorism. You couldn't forget the terrorism either because of the extensive security. I have never opened my bag so many times in a day. You couldn't forget the apocalypse because that was the topic. And you couldn't forget Paris because who can forget Paris? Paris has a way of saying, I'm here, check me out. And Paris is also the absolute opposite of a startup. It's just the absolute opposite of a startup. So, COP21 was a major success. How can these things be? Amy was there. It was a major success. They heard the two of us were coming, representing Judson Memorial Church, and they said, no way, this is all taken care of. It has done mostly the right thing. It was more than we could have expected, not less than we could have expected. And the reason it was more than we could have expected was because of all the people starting up to show up and caring. It's not perfect. The Pope's moral frame prevailed, giving us the same kind of victory that Occupy gave us. Occupy named income inequality as the issue of our time. By the way, the Ford Foundation has just changed its entire guidelines, giving income inequality the major issue they're going to work on. Occupy did that. The Pope's frame and the encyclical really mattered at the conference and to its global leaders. They knew that they couldn't stick to all climate all the time without talking about the third and fourth worlds at the same time. The Pope prevailed in a moral message linking the global economy to the global environment. I know it sounds stupid because wouldn't you think that was already done? It wasn't. Now 200 leaders nearly have signed on to say, yeah, that's the issue. It's both of those issues together. COP21 may also be too little, too late. How can that be? How can all those people, North and South, work as hard as they can every day together with really good French food and wine every evening and still not have it be enough? Because more has to change. Frankly, everything must change. I'm going to name 3 pockets and try not to scare you any more than you already are with the enormity of the goodness and now the task of making it real. The first is the Advent frame. Our friends Zechariah and Mary had become habituated to hopelessness and barrenness. Barbara Brown Taylor says Zechariah's doubt and disbelief is a failure of imagination more than anything else. He's actually struck dumb by the angel, and he opens, after 9 months, his mouth to praise God. Encyclical Laudato Si, praise be. The second frame is the threatening one. The only thing that could really derail this enormous direction and agreement from the wise and weathered people of the world is terrorism. And it may just do that. Those who just can't believe that anything good can happen are so tortured that they may decide to prohibit it. The good has only to be for them. The good can only be for their tribe and their distortion of their tribe. The good so fully pertains to their own story, literally interpreted, that they have to murder to make it true. A man in Colorado Springs felt he had to murder to stop murder. That's nuts. Stories run amok if we allow the fear plot to overtake us, and stories sparkle if we lean towards praise. Interesting, the lead stories these last 10 days have been San Bernardino, Chicago streets erupting, the French election, moving to the right in Islamophobia. The bad news loves to edge out the good news. Indeed, good people and decent governments worldwide commit to less than 2 degrees Celsius as a goal and finding themselves spending all their money and energy on a security state. That's what could happen if terrorism, domestically and internationally, is not stopped. Plus, in the security state, what do we lose first? You can't use your streets. You can't go out. There even may be a strange, bizarre, how can that things be, collusion here. Because governments and the corporations who all but own them will find it much too easy to shut things down. That cannot happen, especially right now, especially if the spring is not to be silenced again. I think of Donald Grump and his uncanny form of demagoguery. He speaks for the early Zechariah, the one who said, "How can anything good be?" And I think of the way many people like to ridicule him for ridiculing other people. People who weather and wear for the good, who retain even after decades of barrenness the capacity to hope and not fear. The people we want to be don't ridicule anybody, even a demagogue. We wait them out. We do call them out. We have to. But with pity, not ridicule. Compassion, not anger. We shake our heads at their fear, not our fists, because we cannot allow the development of the security state to be the main story. The main story is people coming together to care for each other and to care for the planet. That's the story. A third frame and a final one from the third and the fourth world. It was such a privilege to listen to so many smart people talk about strategy. They want help leapfrogging over the industrial cycle of fossil fuels. They want women involved. They argue for very big subjects very well, like biomimicry or permaculture or resilience or regenerativity. Did you hear all those words in Abigail's poem? I could do a whole sermon on what each one of these directions means for a new earth-friendly global economy. They used to be the kind of words that just hippies used all the time. And now you can hear whole international panels of financiers and agriculturalists and politicians talking about them for 2 or 3 hours at a time as the words that will save the world. We saw example after example of people doing beautiful local things like green bonds and agricultural cooperatives and solar and wind. We saw people up and down the Champs-Élysées biking and swinging in order to keep the lights on the boulevard going. Children laughing, swinging, pumping, making energy. We also saw the wild cartoons of Donald Trump beheading the Statue of Liberty, and the People's Climate Pavilions making smoothies and pushing beets on you to save the world. COP21 had a lot of humor, a lot of humus, a lot of humus, and a lot of human. We heard a Zambian woman interpret Rachel Carson. She said the control men, which is what Carson calls them in the book, Silent Spring, the control men thought they could just get rid of insects and that it wouldn't have any impact on songbirds. Duh! They didn't realize that everything is connected and that the way they killed songbirds was by killing insects. They didn't understand that we little people are a part of the world too. We're not bugs. But we will help them understand that we are not bugs and how important the small matters to the large with our beauty and our dignity and our sorghum. We will not die quietly. We will not outsource our responsibility, said she. My Zambian friend also said that she had read Charles Darwin and that everybody misinterprets him. His work is not about the survival of the fittest, but about those most adaptable. And she says, we are adaptable. So, obviously, I could go on forever. I'm not going to. It's a good agreement. It's a good time. Prepare us the way of the goodness. Lo, how a rose ere blooming. Amen.